Welcome to the Grid Mod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Cook, your host of the Grid Mod Pod and Vice President of Technical Strategy at AEIC. On today's episode, I discuss how utilities can streamline communication, person to person, and improve operational efficiency during periods of major grid investment with Jerry Boggs of Duke Energy. This issue is important because as utilities invest more heavily in infrastructure, the operational systems and the communication processes that support field work can quickly become overwhelmed. What may begin as a growth in construction activity can create ripple effects across the control center, field crews, and maintenance planning if the supporting processes are not designed to scale. This conversation highlights how data analytics, practical application development, and strong stakeholder engagement can help utilities identify bottlenecks, reduce unnecessary manual work, and improve how teams coordinate in real time. We hope you walk away from this episode with insights and momentum needed to spark change in our industry.
Hi, Liz. I'm Jerry Boggs. I'm the Director of Distribution Control Center Operations for Duke Energy here in Charlotte. So Duke Energy is located in 6 different states. We have operations up in the Midwest, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. We have operations in North and South Carolina, as well as operations in Florida. And my responsibility in the Distribution Control Center is we are the hub for everything that happens in the distribution world. We work directly with our customers when they have outages. We dispatch field technicians. Our main responsibility is maintaining the grid. If anything happens on the grid, we're working to make sure we keep the grid stable and restore power as soon as possible.
Yes, so it's a big role. So in your journey of this particular project, tell our listeners really what was the particular challenge or identified problem, maybe the big idea to solve in this journey of yours. So what was the challenge? And then we'll go into the project itself.
Okay. So like other utilities, Duke's in the middle of a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar grid investment plan where we're doing a lot of work to strengthen our grid, to improve reliability for our customers so we can better serve our customers. So in 2022 and 2023, we started to see a large increase in construction work that required hotline tags. Before that period, we would see 60 hotline tags a day. That jumped to 350 a day. We saw crews waiting hours to get their hotline tags so they could start doing their work. It created a lot of stress on our field partners as well as control room operators. So we had to start thinking about how we could be better at this because we wanted to be good custodians of the money that we were spending.
Okay, so there's so much to unpack there, right? So ultimately, there's a lot going on the grid, and there's the transformation of the grid. And just for our listeners, when you say hotline tags and crews waiting, one thing my mother would always, she sends me pictures of our local utility, asking me what they're doing. I'm always like, they're probably waiting for their hotline crew, their tag out, so that it's safe for them to approach the particular area that they're doing work on. So I kind of might have answered my own question, but from your perspective, what, for our listeners, what does it entail to develop and create a hotline tag? And what is the purpose behind that?
Yeah, so I'll start with the purpose. So whenever a crew is working up an energized space, there's certain work processes they have to have in place, and one's a hotline tag. So a hotline tag is a protective function on a reclosing device that if something happened, something unexpected happened, the device would open up and de-energize the line. So if there was a car accident, the crew had an issue, it would de-energize the line to keep the electrons from flowing.
Which, being, I was a planner, kind of a system analyst engineer, and then I led the planning team, and we sat with the operations control room, and just kind of, a journey myself is you don't know what you don't know. And so it was such a great opportunity to thinking through this concept of a project that is needed because of some capacity or voltage issue. and then, would trigger a scope of work and the procurement equipment, then construction, then execute. And then in the end game is you have the individuals that are going to install said project. And then in many goals, I guess, but one is to help the control center be able to, simplify and maybe really have the visibility to create safety. And so like hotline tags has been a part of the industry forever. And
Right.
So it's kind of one of these unsaid practices that not a whole lot of people that don't work with utilities know. Like there's an enormous amount of effort and resources and really due diligence to ensure that the appropriate tags are done so that the crews are able to safely perform. So it's an intricate one. So I guess, the problem was too many hotline tags because there's so much work happening on the grid. So that's happening to everyone right now in the industry. Not only do we have an aged infrastructure, we now have new technologies and new capabilities and new mandates. And then, therefore, you have a lot of inefficient resources, workers, only because, you want to make sure they're safe. So how did, and this might be something smaller of a much bigger project, so feel free to talk about the bigger, is, what was your approach and your team's approach from taking this concept to really into an execution? Like what choices or really like what helped pivot, your final direction? Because there's a lot there.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. So, it started with data analytics. We had to look at how the process flowed. Where was the stress points? What times were we seeing this and what areas are we seeing this? And then we had to start looking at, what technologies could help us. Were there process improvements that could be driven to do this? We knew we just couldn't hand over anything to the field because of the complexity of the grid that we have today. We have lots of devices all over our system, from DER to closed loop fizzer to self-healing teams. The intricacies of the grid are not what they were 30 years ago. So we really got a group of together stakeholders of field leaders and myself, and we started just thinking of ideas. And I like to call it the what if plan. What if we tried this? What if we tried this? What if we tried this? And it ultimately got us to a point of we just had to find a better way to communicate. The old way of talking on a phone or a radio just couldn't apply in this situation. So I knew we had an incredible in-house development team from our IT side who had built some communication platforms for our customers that we've implemented over the years. So I reached out to them and said, hey, I have this idea. Is this something that you could pull off for us? And they were on board with it.
Wait, so who did you call?
Our in-house IT organization.
In-house IT.
Yes.
Okay.
So they had been doing some great stuff on the customer side of helping communicate with our customers via text, IVR, web-based applications. So it was like, is there something you can do? Because this is kind of what we are looking for. And then once they started building this platform, we did a very small pilot in one small area in South Carolina and really had people invested in this because this was a very large change. When you think about going from 100 years or almost 100 years of phone communications or radio communications, and now I'm saying, I'm not really going to talk to you about this work anymore. I'm just going to share it with you and you can go to work. So once we had that pilot group set, we had our final direction and we were ready to go.
Okay, so just for a moment. So we're describing, something that appeared through data analytics and a need for a process improvement. But I want to make sure our listeners clearly understand the project itself. So zoom out. If you had to describe in one or maybe two sentences, what did you actually build? I heard a platform to really change this communication to change communication or enhance said communication.
So great question. So we built a web-based application. It's a web page that shares the hotline tag information with the crews. So a crew puts in their request for a hotline tag. The DCC operator processes it and issues it. And what happens is this communication platform, this web-based application, sends a text message to the tag holder and says, your hotline tag is ready. So the hotline tag holder can get onto this application, show themselves on site, and they go to work. At the end of their work, when they're ready to release their hotline tag, they go back into this application. They say, I'm ready to release. That gives a notification to the DCC operator. They remove their hotline tag, and the crew is off with the rest of their day. So we basically have eliminated 95% of the phone calls coming into the control center by using this communication platform. The other 5% are when there's a problem. So let's say a field requester, there's a problem with their request and we can't fulfill it. We can use this application to send them a text message to call the DCC. Hey, there's a problem. We need to talk to you. So that initiates the phone call back to the DCC. They clear up the problem and they issue their hotline tag. So the intent of this was not to eliminate all phone calls, but it was only to eliminate the phone calls that weren't needed. When we have the right information, we didn't need to get on the phone and talk about it. So this tool actually also gives visibility to every hotline tag on the system. So you can have multiple crews working on a circuit. In days past, they wouldn't always know who else is out there working. So now they can look at this tool and see, oh, crew A, B, C, and D all have a hotline tag in this area. So they can coordinate better amongst themselves. So it really just opened up visibility to everybody to see what was happening on the system.
Okay. So many fundamentals and like best practices. So I'm just going to peel away at this. I think the purpose of the Grid Mod Pod was really to give a platform to the utility folk that are being innovative, change champions, and really so we can voice the complexity of what it means to modernize the grid. And quite frankly, it was a terminology that we created based on smart grid, but like that lost the battle. And so really the essence of what we're talking about, like you said, multiple parts, so I just wanted to restate it. So the user, the end user, the control center, which is really the brain of my typical analogy, how the neural network was created over time originally was phone calls, and then operators would actually pull switches. Some think that maybe that reality doesn't exist anymore, but it truly is of presence all throughout how we operate a grid today. Maybe a little bit more intelligent, maybe it's not an actual lever, but there's a coordination between the control center and an entity, aka a being that has to like do physical interaction with said grid to either fix something, maintain something, maybe inspect something, and or replace or build new. So there's lots of reasons to be out in the field. And so what was happening was the way things have always been done was, phone calls from the control center to the field. Then there was like the whole coaching and development of that whole three-way communication, making sure all parties are hearing, the lines are recorded, right? Really methodical with pure intent to keep everyone safe, right? So here comes this realization that we have way too many calls coming in with information that can be shared. And we haven't shared before because we didn't have technology or IT solutions to allow the information to be in the palm of the hand of the field person that the control center is still sharing. So you're changing your whole neural network of thought. Anyway, that's like a big change. And so why doesn't it happen overnight? Is those individuals that maybe for their own personal perspective really like to hear a human tell them something from a safety. So there's an evolution there. And then, ensuring that the information that is being programmed on the one end is effectively showing up effectively on the back end. I mean, there's so much there to like willingly accept and be confident in. So you have your leaders that need to adopt, and then you have your incoming crews that have to adopt. And there's just so much unpack. Anyway, so it's exciting because it's something simple, but it took an enormous amount, and what I understand, of coordination of many groups. And the integration of this IT team that has always just been, there to support, but now they're a key component. Correct. Anyway, I love it. There's so much there. And then also for our listeners, I think, so ultimately those crews that were sitting waiting were fundamentally waiting for the return phone call. But what you've said is you've taken that out, given the information, they do their work, and then when you get pinged with that text, that allows it. So it's not like the goal was to eliminate phone calls. The goal was just to streamline the information that was shareable.
Correct. Yeah, if we could talk and have the right information, or there was no reason for us to talk if we shared that digitally. So now basically we look at it as digital three-way communication. When we send them that information for their request, they review everything on their request, they confirm it's good. I'm on site and I go to work, and we get a notification, and it's truly streamlined how we do things.
Love it. So just thinking through that, so you're together managing, leading a group of the control center. There's like it's kind of like inertia, right? Like, okay, this is too much. This is too much. So there was a threshold where, you finally like position yourself to talk with IT. And I guess for our outside listeners and you being a champion of this, it isn't as easy as make a phone call to IT and then suddenly you get the resources, the people and the money to say, go do. What have you learned from just that process of like identifying issue, making it elevated to a story that hooks, the people that need to be aligned? Like maybe take us through that kind of perspective that you learned.
Yeah, from a change perspective, it's really about getting the right people involved, engaged, having people willing to sit around a table and look for different solutions. The we've always done it this way mentality is not the person you want to have around sitting around the table with you. And then really relying on data, really relying on the data that tells you the story, not just from a personal perspective, but you can look through it and analyze that and really help you direct where you need to go. And then, working from an IT perspective, it's clarity. This is what I'm looking for. What can you do with this? And and then allowing them to interact with all the other different IT teams and build interfaces and do all
And
those
compete with
things.
all the other priorities.
Well, and this one was a serious priority because
There
our
you go.
crews were not getting to work. So, I had great backup from my leadership team of you need to go solve this problem. What do you need from me? And really having that high up on the risk register of issues, not just from a completion of work, but an employee morale perspective.
Right.
We had linemen just sitting in trucks. That's not what we do. I had operators frustrated from 6 in the morning to 11:30 in the morning. All they were doing was picking up a phone. That's all they did all day long. So, just not just from the construction perspective, but the employee morale perspective was a huge win.
And so, what also strikes me is, and something that has happened over like the stewardship of advancing grid modernization, which is, there's building blocks and there's components and it's all integrated and it's one very complex system, but you can't really visualize it in some pyramid with a North Star because in essence, you don't want to lead with technology first. Like it's not about the technology that's become available or like the new shiny object or tool. Like this project was really from this whole signal to noise, right? Like, and also another thing is like for you to be able to advance or elevate the reality of what is happening, you needed data to really drive that. So like thinking about 5 or 10 years ago, we as an industry have not had access to this type of data and be able to like cleanse it, govern it, and
Yes.
then produce it to not only yourself as the leader, but then others, and then that trust. And like what you said, so this was actually a problem that really could reduce friction in an existent control center field, right? Like, so operators can think more clearly. They believe that their work is of value. The crews are getting more information, safety improves. And I think the biggest thing, trust improves, right?
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. And it opened up the view of everything in the field, not just to your one location.
Right.
It allowed visibility to we were all seeing the same things. They're not sitting in the control room with 12 screens and seeing all these different parts and pieces, but they can see their part of the world that concerns them that day. And that was a huge benefit as well.
I feel like I'm just talking myself into like, instead of like modernization, like really it's the human layer. So how do we like play that into the story? I mean,
Well, and it's not just modernization, the simplification.
right.
We can
Which is
overcomplicate
modernization. Yeah.
everything. Yeah. So
Like we
how do we do that?
overcomplexed and now we want to simplify. I think, and we had a workshop around the AEIC Ops Center. We brought in, a dozen plus utilities and we talked about the future control center. And like after 2 days of togetherness, like in the end, everyone just wants like the one screen. with the information that allows the control operator to like make decisions based on trusted signals, and there's only a few signals that are evidently important. Because we have all these graphics of like AI robots and like goggles and all these screens, and it's like that's actually we need to simplify.
Yeah. My analogy I always use is a heads-up display for a fighter pilot. The stuff that's right in front of them are the most critical that they have to know.
Right.
Everything else is off to the side. They can get it if they need it, but this is the stuff you need to operate. So yeah, I think that's an industry standard that we're all trying to get to.
Yes. So now that you've proven that this platform's working, what comes next? Are there other communication workflows? And you kind of alluded to it, like you identified like this actually gave you exposure to a lot more, which is another indicator of like messaging that I would love to get out to the wider audiences is like start now, choose one use case, and it will scale. But we get stuck in this, like, what's the cost benefit analysis? Will this increase our rates? And then like we're stuck. Anyway, that's side note. So are there, other communication workflows that you've identified, or maybe any other like integration of other systems that you guys have or will be looking to implement?
Yeah, so one of the things that we identified from this platform was again that visibility to the field. So can they see clearances? Can they get a list of all the clearances on the system? Can they get switching instructions on their device, whether it's a phone? I mean, the hotline tag, the web feature, you can view it on a cell phone or a laptop, however you want to see it. So can you see switching instructions? Can you have a portal into your outage management system? So a line tech in the field, if they're 1,000 feet away from their truck, can pull out their phone and enter stuff in, so customers get more real-time information, and it ends the aggravation of going back to a truck. So it's really about visibility, sharing information, so we're all seeing the same things. That's one of the things that we're looking at for this application of how do you expand that. And then again, I go back to what's the next thing after that. Our ADMS platform is bringing some things to help the field. So I think what this has done is open the door. It's opened the door to new ideas, new technologies, getting away from the way we've always done something. That it's not scary to go to digital communication. So I think that's where we go next.
Yeah, you're building the trust. And for any new listeners, ADMS is an Advanced Distribution Management System. And so that is the essence of like full situational awareness of the distribution grid. It's ever evolving. So for our control center directors or operation leaders or anyone that just feels the desire to understand or that are overwhelmed by call volume or manual coordination or bottlenecks, where should they start? And is it the data? Is it the process mapping, stakeholder alignment? Or what do you advise?
So I think some lessons learned I took away from this is always start with the data. Personal experience is great. It drives you to the data. The data will point you to where you need to be along with that user feedback. I think when you start thinking about designing something, stakeholder engagement, and that's our field partners and not just the leaders, it's the people on the other end of that phone, the other end of that click, our operators. When you're looking to design something, start simple. I talked earlier, we can overcomplicate anything, but we started very simply with this program. What's the minimum viable product? What can we do to get this out to solve the problem? And then once you get it implemented, the problem solved, you can come back and say, all right, how do we make it better? All these users now have an experience. Hey, can you change this color to red instead of blue? Can you add this messaging? Can I add this feature? And we're already starting to see that from our field partners. And the ultimate priority has to be safety. In whatever you drive, you can't take anything that's going to take away a safety factor. And then I think, again, it goes back to establish a what if culture. What if we tried this? And then go try it. Try it small, build from there. Because I can tell you when we did our pilot, within a week of doing the pilot, I had construction crews from across the state calling me saying, when can I get that?
Nice. So
So
there's
the
no
message.
adoption of technology problems in the field.
No, well, there is, but that's why we started with a very small pilot of field users that I talk to every day, 2 and 3 times a day. How did it work? What do we need to change? How do we tweak this process? What's the messaging need to be? And as they got into it, and we, there's bumps in every start, we smoothed out the bumps. And after the first week, those field users were like, we are locked in. This is perfect. Let's go. And then that's when the phone call started, because we had solved the problem for that small pilot group, but we hadn't solved the problem for everybody else. And they heard
Love it.
relief and they wanted relief. And that was my change management.
I have a story about change management, but I'll save it for another day. So yeah, Jerry, this is a great example of modernization from the inside out. You don't start with a massive overhaul. Don't try to boil the ocean. You started with a pain point, too many calls, too many bottlenecks, right? And really the manual coordination, which I think for any of our external stakeholders, this idea of understanding manual coordination, I think could be a great space to build trust. But anyway, I diverge. And so you build a platform to eliminate, you said 95% of unnecessary noise. That is transformational. Thank you for being a steward and for sharing your story. And I think across AIC and across the industry, we continue to see the most effective efforts are ones that reduce the friction, improve visibility, empower their people, and can ultimately, but you have to do it first, scale quietly. And so it's not the big flashy, gizmos and gadgets. It's really this process improvement, empowerment of people. And sadly, we can't really quantify that from a monetary value. It's quite priceless. So thank you for walking us through this. And to our listeners, if your control center feels overwhelmed, ask yourself, what is the noise and how can you remove it and give you that clarity? So any last words to our audience, Jerry, before we wrap up?
Yeah, Liz, thank you for the opportunity to share our story. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Today. And again, listeners, if anything resonated, please share with your peer, your colleague, as we all transform the grid together.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the Grid Mod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.